The first temptation, what if I told you that pleasure isn't about indulgence, but about understanding? That the deepest, most intoxicating forms of enjoyment don't come from the world around you, but from within. Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote that man is condemned to be free, a paradox that suggests we are both limitless in potential and burdened by choice. But when it comes to pleasure, are we truly free? Or are we merely slaves to impulse, mistaking fleeting gratification for something deeper? The night it all began, Vincent found himself in a dimly lit Parisian cafe, his fingers tracing the rim of a half-empty glass of absinthe. Outside, the rain turned the cobblestone streets into a shimmering river of golden reflections. He had spent years chasing pleasure in all its obvious forms: money, women, success. Yet he was haunted by a persistent emptiness, a gnawing sense that none of it was real. The pleasure he sought always slipped through his fingers like sand, leaving him hungrier than before. Then she appeared. Her entrance was not loud, nor did she demand attention in any overt way. It was the subtlety of her presence that drew Vincent in, like a whisper against his thoughts. She wore a deep green dress that clung effortlessly to her form, the color of twilight just before surrendering to night. But her eyes held the true enigma. They were not searching for validation or conquest. They were studying, dissecting, knowing. She took the seat across from him without invitation. "You look lost," she said, her voice smooth as the drink in his hand. Vincent smirked, accustomed to the game. "And you look like you know exactly where you're going." She tilted her head slightly, as if weighing his words like a merchant inspects gold for authenticity. "Tell me," she said, ignoring his deflection. "Do you actually enjoy any of it?" He hesitated. Enjoy what? The chase. The trophies. The illusion of having it all. Vincent's smile faltered, the confidence in his posture slipping ever so slightly. No one had ever asked him that, not in a way that demanded an answer beyond the rehearsed lies he told himself. She leaned in, close enough that the scent of jasmine and something darker, more primal, filled his senses. "Pleasure," she whispered, "isn't about possession. It's about surrender." Vincent felt something stir in his chest, not desire, not attraction, but something more dangerous, curiosity. And curiosity, he knew, was the gateway to losing control. The descent into pleasure. Vincent had always believed that pleasure was something to be taken, something to be controlled. He thought he understood desire, its mechanics, its illusions. But as he sat across from this woman, her words hanging in the air like a whispered secret, he felt something shift. Pleasure isn't about possession. It's about surrender. "What do you mean by that?" Vincent asked, leaning in despite himself. She smiled, but it wasn't coy or playful. It was the smile of someone who already knew how the story would end. Sartre once said, "Everything has been figured out, except how to live." She swirled the wine in her glass, watching the deep red liquid cling to the sides. "People think pleasure is about more wealth, more lovers, more power. But tell me, when has more ever satisfied you?" Vincent opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. He had spent his life chasing indulgence, devouring the world's offerings like a man desperate to prove his own hunger. And yet, he was here, sitting in front of a stranger, feeling more unsatisfied than ever. She continued, her voice laced with the kind of certainty that only comes from understanding things most people ignore. "Sartre believed that we are burdened by radical freedom, trapped not by external forces, but by our own choices. And that includes pleasure. You think you are in control of it, but it controls you. You run from boredom, from emptiness, always chasing the next high. And yet, here you are." Vincent exhaled sharply, a quiet laugh escaping. "So what, you think the answer is to stop chasing pleasure?" She leaned in, her fingers resting lightly against the stem of her glass. "No," she whispered. "I think the answer is to chase it differently." A pause. The rain outside had softened into a rhythmic tapping against the window, like an impatient heartbeat. Vincent studied her. "Who are you?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Someone who has already lost everything you're afraid to let go of." The words hit him like a blow. He didn't even know why. Maybe because, for the first time, someone saw through him. Not the carefully crafted image, not the mask of confidence, but the restless man beneath. And that terrified him more than anything. The illusion of happiness. Vincent lit a cigarette with steady hands, though his mind was anything but calm. The woman across from him, still nameless, still unreadable, had cracked something open inside him, something he wasn't sure he wanted to confront. "You speak as if happiness is a trick," he said, watching the smoke curl upward, vanishing before it could fully take shape. She arched a brow. "Isn't it?" Vincent smirked, but there was no amusement behind it. Happiness is real. People live for it, fight for it. They fight for it, she repeated, tilting her head slightly. And yet, how many people do you know who are truly happy? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Vincent had met men who had everything, money, power, women who adored them, and yet they were restless, searching for something unnamed. He had seen artists who, in their pursuit of perfection, had destroyed themselves. He had known lovers who, once they had won the object of their obsession, found themselves disillusioned, longing for the chase instead. No one was happy. Not truly. The woman watched him in silence, as if waiting for the realization to settle. Then, she leaned forward, lowering her voice. Sartre believed that happiness is not something we find. It is something we invent. But here's the problem. Most people don't know what they actually want. They only know what they've been told to want. Vincent frowned. And what do you want? A slow smile. Freedom. He scoffed. Aren't we all free? She shook her head. No. We're prisoners of expectation. We chase pleasure, thinking it will make us happy. But what if happiness isn't pleasure at all? What if it's something else, something harder? Responsibility. Mastery. Purpose. Vincent's grip tightened around his cigarette. He had spent years believing that freedom meant no limits, no commitments, no ties, no responsibilities. The ability to do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. And yet, with all that freedom, he still felt empty. Was it possible he had misunderstood the entire concept? The woman's voice softened. Tell me, Vincent, when was the last time you felt truly alive? His mind flickered through memories. Fast cars, beautiful women, the thrill of winning. But the longer he thought, the more he realized those highs had faded quickly, leaving him hollow. And then, a different kind of memory surfaced, one he hadn't expected. Late nights spent working on something that mattered. The rush of learning something new, something challenging. The quiet satisfaction of pushing himself beyond what he thought he was capable of. He had mistaken pleasure for happiness. The woman saw the change in his expression and nodded, as if she had seen it happen before. We suffer, she said, not because life is cruel, but because we keep looking for meaning in things that were never meant to satisfy us. Vincent exhaled, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. The question now wasn't whether she was right. The question was, what was he going to do about it? The truth about pleasure and happiness, most people spend their lives chasing pleasure, believing it will lead to happiness. But what if this pursuit is exactly what keeps them trapped in dissatisfaction? Jean-Paul Sartre argued that humans are condemned to be free, meaning we bear the full weight of our choices. And yet, most people don't choose. They follow impulses, societal expectations, or fleeting desires, mistaking them for fulfillment. The three types of pleasure: 1. Instant gratification, the lowest form. This is the pleasure most people chase: food, sex, entertainment, luxury. It's easy, immediate, and addictive. But like any drug, its effects wear off quickly, leaving you craving more. Sartre would call this a distraction, a way to avoid the responsibility of creating true meaning. People who rely on instant gratification become slaves to their desires, always consuming but never satisfied. 2. Achievement-based pleasure, temporary but valuable. This comes from success, winning a competition, closing a big deal, earning recognition. It's more fulfilling than basic pleasure because it requires effort. However, it still fades. The thrill of success wears off, and many successful people find themselves lost once they've reached their goals. Why? Because they've tied their happiness to external validation rather than something deeper. 3. Existential pleasure, the highest form. This is the rarest type of pleasure, the kind that comes from mastery, growth, and purpose. It's what Sartre called authenticity, the ability to create meaning rather than seek it. This pleasure isn't about consuming, it's about building, whether it's skills, relationships, or impact. Unlike the other two, this kind of fulfillment doesn't fade, it deepens over time. Why most people are unhappy? Sartre believed that unhappiness stems from bad faith, living a life that isn't truly yours. People chase careers they don't love, relationships they don't believe in, and pleasures that don't satisfy them because they're afraid to face the truth. Happiness is not given, it must be created. Look at anyone who radiates true fulfillment. They aren't the ones endlessly indulging in pleasure. They are the ones who have chosen a path of mastery, discipline, and purpose. They suffer, but their suffering has meaning. And that is why they are content. How to find true fulfillment? 1. Stop chasing, start building instead of seeking pleasure, create something. A skill, a body of work, a philosophy of life. True pleasure comes from becoming something greater, not consuming more. 2. Embrace discomfort. The greatest moments of growth come from discomfort. Sartre believed that we are responsible for defining ourselves, and that means pushing beyond what's easy. 3. Detach from external validation. Most people are miserable because they rely on others for their sense of worth. Sartre's philosophy teaches that the only way to be truly free is to define your value on your own terms. 4. Live with purpose, not impulse. The easiest way to ruin your life is to live for short-term pleasure. The easiest way to find true fulfillment is to dedicate yourself to something bigger than yourself. Happiness is not pleasure. It is the result of living intentionally. Most people will never find it because they are afraid to take full responsibility for their existence. But those who do, those who choose purpose over impulse, discover a pleasure that never fades. The choice has always been yours. The trap of freedom. Most people think that freedom is the key to happiness. They believe that if they had no rules, no obligations, and no restrictions, they would finally be content. But Sartre argued the opposite. Too much freedom can be paralyzing. We live in an era of endless choices, careers, relationships, lifestyles, identities. And yet, people are more anxious, lost, and unfulfilled than ever before. Why? Because choice without direction is a curse, not a gift. Why unlimited freedom makes you miserable? 1. The paradox of choice. Studies in psychology show that when people have too many choices, they become less satisfied with whatever they pick. The more options you have, the more you fear making the wrong choice. This leads to indecision, regret, and an inability to commit, whether to a career, a relationship, or a personal goal. 2. The fear of responsibility. Sartre famously said, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." This means there is no destiny, no external meaning, only the meaning you create. But that level of responsibility terrifies most people. It's easier to blame society, parents, or bad luck than to admit that your life is in your hands. 3. The illusion of the perfect life. Social media bombards us with images of people who seem to have it all: money, status, adventure. The modern world tells you that you can be anything, so you start believing you must be everything. The result? You're never satisfied with what you have, because you always think something better is just out of reach. How to escape the freedom trap. 1. Choose a path and commit to it. The most successful and fulfilled people aren't those who had every option. They are the ones who picked a direction and stuck with it. Happiness comes from mastery, and mastery requires commitment. 2. Redefine freedom. True freedom isn't about having no limits. It's about having the right limits. A man who dedicates himself to a craft, a mission, or a higher purpose is more free than a man who drifts aimlessly, constantly second-guessing himself. 3. Take full responsibility for your life. The most powerful realization you can have is this: no one is coming to save you. There is no system, no guru, no secret trick that will give your life meaning. You have to create it yourself. Unlimited freedom is an illusion. True fulfillment comes from structure, purpose, and mastery. Sartre's lesson is clear: you are condemned to be free. You can either let that reality crush you, or you can use it to build something worth living for. The choice, as always, is yours. Jean-Paul Sartre spent his life dissecting human existence, freedom, and desire. His philosophy wasn't just about abstract ideas. It was a brutal, honest look at why people suffer and how they can escape the trap of meaningless pleasure. If you followed this far, you already understand the core idea. Most people do not seek true happiness, they seek escape. They drown themselves in pleasure, distraction, and external validation because they fear taking responsibility for their own existence. Sartre called this living in bad faith, lying to yourself to avoid the truth. Let's break it down further with his own words. 1. Man is condemned to be free. At first, this sounds like a contradiction. How can freedom be a condemnation? Sartre meant that human beings have no predetermined purpose. Unlike a knife, which is designed for cutting, or a clock, which is made to tell time, humans have no built-in function. We are thrown into the world with complete freedom, and that freedom is terrifying because it means we alone are responsible for what we become. Most people avoid this responsibility. They follow societal expectations, chase pleasure, and adopt identities that were handed to them rather than chosen. But in doing so, they betray their own potential. If you want real fulfillment, you must accept the weight of your own freedom and make choices that give your life meaning, rather than drifting from one pleasure to the next. 2. Existence precedes essence. This is Sartre's most famous idea. Traditionally, people believed that humans had an essence, a fixed nature or destiny, before they were born. Sartre rejected this. He argued that you are not born with a purpose, you create it through your actions. What does this mean for pleasure and happiness? You do not find happiness, it is something you build through how you live. If your life feels empty, it's not because the world has failed you, it's because you haven't chosen meaning for yourself. Pleasure without purpose is just an escape from freedom. It feels good temporarily, but it leads nowhere. The solution? Define yourself through action. If you want to be someone who lives with purpose, you must prove it with how you spend your time, energy, and effort. 3. We are our choices. Everything in your life is the result of a choice, even if that choice was to avoid making a decision. Sartre believed that people often deceive themselves, pretending they are powerless when in reality, they have simply refused to act. Think about how this applies to pleasure. If you feel unfulfilled, it's not because life is meaningless, it's because you haven't made the choices that create meaning. If you chase shallow pleasure, you are choosing emptiness, even if you tell yourself you have no control. If you want a deeper sense of happiness, you must actively choose to pursue challenges, mastery, and growth. Things that require effort but lead to lasting fulfillment. 4. Hell is other people. This is one of Sartre's most misunderstood quotes. People assume he meant that life would be better if we were alone, but that's not the case. Sartre believed that most people live in bad faith. They define themselves by how others see them instead of choosing their own path. This is why so many people live for external validation. They seek pleasure, wealth, and status not because it makes them happy, but because they think it will make them appear successful in the eyes of others. Sartre's warning is clear. If you live your life chasing what other people think matters, you will never be truly free. The final confirmation. Sartre's answer to pleasure and happiness. Pleasure is not the enemy. But pleasure without meaning is an empty pursuit. Sartre's entire philosophy leads to one conclusion. Happiness is not given to you. It is something you create through action, responsibility, and purpose. The freedom to do anything is meaningless unless you commit yourself to something greater. If you avoid responsibility, chase distractions, and live for the approval of others, you will never feel truly fulfilled. Sartre didn't believe in easy answers. He didn't offer a step-by-step guide to happiness. Instead, he gave us something far more powerful. The realization that we alone are responsible for making our lives meaningful. And that is the most difficult and the most liberating truth of all. The final truth, a life worth living. Everything we've explored comes down to one terrifying, exhilarating truth. You are the architect of your own existence. Most people never accept this. They drift through life believing they are victims of circumstance, blaming luck, society, or fate for their unhappiness. They chase pleasure, thinking it will save them. But deep down, they know the truth. Pleasure is temporary. Growth is permanent. Jean-Paul Sartre didn't just expose the illusions people live under. He showed how to break free. He revealed that happiness isn't something you stumble upon. It's something you create through the choices you make every single day. What most people will never realize, there's a reason why so many people live in bad faith. Why they pretend their actions don't matter. Why they numb themselves with distractions. Because freedom is terrifying. To accept that you are fully responsible for your own life means there is no one left to blame. No more excuses. No more waiting for the right moment. This is why most people never change. But the few who do, they become unstoppable. Stop asking for happiness, start creating meaning. You won't find it in money, endless pleasure, or approval from others. You will find it in mastery, purpose, and choosing growth over comfort. Commit to something greater than yourself. A limitless freedom is an illusion. Fulfillment comes from structure, discipline, and dedication. The happiest people aren't those with endless choices. They are the ones who chose a path and owned it. Take full responsibility for your life, and no one is coming to save you. You are the only one who can change your reality. Every choice you make today determines who you become tomorrow. The final revelation. Are you ready? Sartre taught that life has no inherent meaning, but that doesn't make it meaningless. It means you have the power to shape it. Some will read this and forget it by tomorrow, but some will feel it in their bones. They will recognize that their life, right now, is nothing but the sum of their choices. And they will make a decision to stop running, to stop escaping, to stop living for the approval of others, to take control, to build something worth remembering, to live with purpose. The question is, will you be one of them? The end.